This is digitaltoolsforarchitects.com InDesign 2.8 using the Align tool. This is Adobe InDesign CS6 that we're going to be using today. And so what I want to do is I want to go over kind of how the Align window works. And luckily in CS6 there's a lot of self-alignment features that happen in InDesign that can help you out. But sometimes you need a little bit more than that, and so we'll go through the Align window. So in order to start this process, I need some rectangular frames that I can work from. And I'm going to specify an actual size for the frame instead of trying to draw out a frame and be very precise and, oh, I want it to be 1 inch by 1 inch. Instead, I'm just going to click, and when I click, it's going to bring up the rectangle options dialog, and I can specify what size I want. So let's say I want 1.5 inches, and we'll say 1.5, so it's a square. And I'll go ahead and say OK, and you'll see that it creates this square for me. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this square a couple times. So let me come over here and use the regular selection tool here, and let me paste a few more of these together. Now you've already seen this happen briefly there, is that when I move and drag objects around in Adobe InDesign CS6, I'll have some automatic alignment tools. So for example, if this is off center and I move it toward the center of the page, you'll see that it'll bring up a pink line and snap to the center of the page. Likewise, if I move my mouse up, it'll snap to the horizontal center of the page as well. So I know that that's exactly in the center of the page. Likewise, if I were to move this object down, you can see where it's going to line up on the center, but it'll also line up on its own individual object. So for example there, the center of the object would be lining up with this object. Right. Likewise, I could move it so that the top would line up like that, and you get the idea. Okay, so let's move this one back down a little bit. Let's move this one over, and let's move this one up here. See how they're snapping together. Now, if I have multiple objects in a row, you can see that it will equalize the space between the objects. So in this particular example, you have the two arrows that are at the bottom. That's showing you that these are going to be equally spaced. Okay. Let's take these three and copy them and paste them in so that we have another set, and now we have these placed in as well. Okay, they're reasonably aligned together. Okay, so this is working within the general context of the guides that are already available for you in InDesign automatically. I can, however, open up the Align window. So mine's already docked over here on the right, but if you don't have it docked yet, you can go to Window, Object and Layout, and pick Align, and the Align window will show up. Usually it shows up as its own window that's floating out here in space. I tend to dock it and leave it down here because I use it frequently. So let me click on the Align window here, and I'll work through my examples. So let's say, let me move these around a little bit so that they're not so perfectly in line. Okay, so let's say I want all of these objects across the top to line up with the top of this object. What I'll do is I'll select the three objects, then I'll click one more time on the object that I want to stay in place. That's called the key object. And so in this instance, I've selected the key object as this corner object, and I want these other objects to align to the top. So I'll use this Align to Top Edges command, and when I do that, you'll see that these two objects will snap up to that location. Okay. Likewise, I can do the same sort of thing. Let me select these two objects here and here. Once again, I'll pick this as the key object, so I'll click one extra time here, and I'll align the left edges. And so those are now aligned correctly. Okay. So this can be very useful in terms of setting up some basic alignments. But there's also times where we want to be able to distribute objects, right, across a distance. And so, for example, if we want this object to fall in the middle of these two objects, right, we can select these three objects, and then we can use the distribute objects, and so we'll just distribute by center, and you'll see that it'll center this object between these two objects. Right? We can do the same thing down here. Right? Now the challenge here would be we'd want these two objects to be set next to one another so that this alignment would happen. So let's set that as the key object. We'll align to the right here. Perfect. Now we want these three objects like that, and we want to distribute the spacing along the centers, and there it is. So you see it didn't pull it up to being flush at the top here, but it did distribute the object in between the other two objects. Okay. The other option that we have is the distribute spacing tool here, and a lot of times this is useful if we want to have a specific spacing between objects. So I'll select these objects. I'm going to click an extra time on this object to make that the key object, which means it's not going to move. And then I'm going to use spacing of 1/8 of an inch. It's already in here, 0.125, and then I'll distribute the spacing, and it will adjust the spacing in between each of these objects to be exactly 1/8 of an inch. And so we'll do the same thing here. Let me select this and select this, and I want to distribute the object. We'll keep this as the key object, and I'll distribute the spacing vertically here, and now that's at 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so I can select these last three. This is again going to be my key object. I'm going to align them all to the top, and then I'll distribute my spacing to be 1/8 of an inch in between them. And so I know this is a very precise layout pattern, and I've used the Align tool to get there. That was digitaltoolsforarchitects.com InDesign 2.8 using the Align tool in Adobe InDesign CS6.